Ben Shapiro.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Good to see y'all. Well, it's a blast to be here. Thank you so much for coming. I only wish that the venue were a little bit bigger so the folks in the overflow room could be in here with us. I want to thank Young Americans for Freedom and Fred Allen for sponsoring this event, doing all the hard work to make it happen. I know that I only come for a night, but everybody has to put an enormous amount of hard work to make events like this happen beforehand and then take all the flack that comes afterward. Thanks for them putting up with all the mishigas from the Council on Student Affairs and for working through the mystery of the missing flyers, which apparently have been disappearing like ballots in Broward County of late. Although I think that mystery was solved today. Actually, one of the protesters, I assume, outside, put out a video of himself ripping down one of the flyers. I mean, not all heroes wear capes, guys. I mean, that person was responsible for saving countless feelings. Thanks also to the university for standing up for free speech, ensuring this event could go off as planned. And thanks to law enforcement for protecting our rights day in and day out. Now, I'd like to begin tonight by noting there was some actual planned opposition, and I wouldn't want the evening to go by without getting them their due. I mean, obviously, they're putting in a lot of work as well. I know the Young Democratic Socialists are tabling in case you have nothing better to do, and I mean really like nothing better to do. If you want to hear them talk about raising campus minimum wage to $15 so people can either be thrown out of work or they can raise your tuition fees, then they are right outside, presumably spending their evening being lonely. Also, the Columbus Anti-Racist Action Group, which is an Antifa offshoot from all of their branding and the fact that they seem to be wearing masks across their faces, they say they wanted to take direct action. They put out a flyer earlier today, in the last couple of days, reading, "If these people," meaning you, "are allowed to have a positive experience at Tuesday night's event, you had better believe that there will be an immediate uptick in the racist attacks we see every day on the news," which is a weird contention. So apparently you are all vicious racists who are going to go out and beat up minority folks for no apparent reason after hearing me speak. It's also kind of weird because I've spoken at upward of 36 campuses in the last couple of years. There has not been not a single reported incident of a racial attack by anybody who has ever supported me and gone to one of my campus lectures. In fact, the only crime that has ever occurred in association with any of my campus lectures has been members of Antifa who have been committing criminal acts at my actual lectures. Apparently, they're outside right now screaming, pardon the language, "Fuck Ben Shapiro." To which I say, no thanks, I'm married. And also, #MeToo. Also, there is a note that I saw that was going around from the Moral Scholars Program Student Advisory Council. This note I just saw a few minutes ago. It made me feel very powerful, I got to be honest with you. I will read it to you. It says, "Shapiro's rhetoric has the potential to threaten the emotional and mental safety of much of the campus community." Wow. "If you do not feel comfortable around a climate that will be created by Ben Shapiro's presence," it's like an aura or something, "we encourage you to seek a safe environment for yourself." Now, I live near the California wildfires, and this makes me sound a lot scarier than those. Like, I have to actually seek a safe environment away from my aura. "Knowing the hostile environment that can result from these kinds of events, we encourage you to seek an inclusive environment and reach out to talk with someone." And they say, if you do not have a safe space or prefer not to be alone, please feel free to join other moral scholars and our staff in the MSP Learning Community on the 3rd floor of Blackburn House tonight from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Thank you and stay safe. Man, we are a threatening bunch, aren't we? And we are just scary. I mean, look, I know. I've been working out. I'm physically intimidating. I get it. I get it. I mean, people look at me and they are just scared. They run the other way. But with that said, what? So tonight, I actually want to talk about the big lie that every politician tells you. And that lie is really very simple. That lie is the government can fix your problems. Okay, this is a lie. The government cannot fix your problems. Now, first a caveat. There are cases in which the government is necessary. I'm not an anarchist. Conservatives are not anarchists. The government is necessary, according to the American Founding Fathers, to protect three things: life, liberty, property. Those are the three things. The government is necessary in order to protect life, because there are certain people who are not strong enough to protect their own lives, and so we delegate out that authority to a neutral arbiter, namely the government, in order to protect everybody's life. Liberty, the government exists to protect existing God-given rights that pre-exist government. This is the Lockean bargain. And we in the conservative movement are not believers that rights spring from government itself, that the government creates rights out of nothing and then hands those rights to you because the government is benevolent and kind. We don't believe any of that. We believe that you, in a state of nature, meaning just for existing, there are certain rights that come along with that. And those rights include the right to free speech, the right to free practice of your religion, and indeed, the third thing that government has to protect, your right to property. And this is your ability to use your labor in creative, wonderful ways, and to benefit your neighbors by doing so, and to alienate that labor, to trade that labor for other people's labor. It's the government's job to protect these three things, all because these are extensions of you as a unique individual. As a human being made in the image of God with unique value as a human being, you have these three things that no one can take away from you: life, liberty, property. And we create government specifically in order to protect these. Now, in order for the government to do that, the government has to stop itself from violating life, liberty, and property. It's not just their job to ensure that other private actors leave you alone. The founders were very intent on preventing government from overstepping its own boundaries and then invading your life and your liberty and your property. And this is why the founders made very clear in the Declaration of Independence that any government that oversteps those boundaries loses its legitimacy, and there is a real rationale for overthrowing such a government. Any government that actually becomes the great invader of rights loses the consent of the people and thereby its legitimacy. Well, in a world in which we live free lives, but the true threat to our liberties doesn't come from other individuals, it comes instead from government, politics these days ought to be removing governmental barriers to your exercise of liberty, while of course maintaining a government that can fulfill that basic mission. But that's not what politicians on every side promise you. On every side, Republicans, Democrats, folks in the center, they all promise you the same thing. The thing they promise you is that if you have a problem, they can fix your problem. When they say the government can fix your problems, they're not talking about the problem of somebody killing you, because we all agree the government should stop people from killing each other. Right? They're not talking about the problem of somebody invading your house and stealing your property. Everybody agrees that the government should stop people from stealing your property. And we generally agree that the government should not get in the way of you signing a contract to work at a certain place or trade one good or product for another good or product. What they are really talking about is the government alleviating problems in your life that are not the result of other people harming you. Right? You have a problem in your life, and it's not the result of someone stealing from you or hurting you or doing anything bad to you. It's just a problem in your life. And therefore, the government is going to come in, and it's going to fix it for you. This is the pitch that folks on all sides make. Today's politics basically breaks down into three versions of this argument. Two are from the left, and one is from the right. Okay, the first version of this argument is the intersectional argument. This is the one we hear most often on college campuses. And the argument goes something like this. Historic discrimination means that there is inequality. That inequality means that it is government's job to rectify those past ills through newfound discrimination. By violating individual rights, we can rectify the inequalities of the past. Now, this comes along with some pretty ugly rhetoric and some pretty ugly philosophy. The idea here is that we can determine whether you get to speak on politics or whether your group should be targeted by the government based on historical injustice or current inequality. What this means is that certain groups outweigh other groups when it comes to who we should listen to about politics. If your group has been more victimized in the past, then we should listen more to your group, and your group should get certain benefits from the government in order to fix that inequality that previously existed. And so there's a hierarchy of groups that exists on college campuses in terms of who we're supposed to listen to. It exists in politics in terms of which groups government programs are supposed to benefit. And the hierarchy goes something like this. At the very top, the folks who are discriminated against most, supposedly, and the people who we therefore have to use government in order to help. Right? These would be the LGBT folks. And then after that, it would be black folks. Then it would be Hispanic folks. Then it would be women. Then it would be Asians. Then it would be Jews. Then it would be white males. Right? That would be the hierarchy of intersectional groups. And if you rank low on this particular hierarchy, that's because you rank high on the so-called power hierarchy. And because you rank high on the power hierarchy, we should not listen to you. You should not have a role in determining how government is done. Because after all, your current privileged status is a result of past discrimination and past evil. And the government can fix that for you. The government can fix all of these things for you. This is where the check your privilege arguments come from. You say, listen, the policy you're espousing is unfair. The policy you're espousing is discriminatory. It's cracking down on one group at the expense of another group. Right? That policy is just not good policy. Well, the response to that is, you don't get to talk about that because you are a beneficiary of the system that previously existed. Shut up. And this makes for not only a bad politics, but also it makes for bad policy itself. Because it turns out the government is not actually capable of rectifying every imbalance. See, the intersectional argument is an argument that states too much. It says that every inequality that exists all across American society is the result of this history of inequity. Every inequality, every disparity is discrimination. Every time you look at a poor black guy, it is the fault of a rich white guy. Every time you see one group that is disproportionately imprisoned, that is the result of another group that is disproportionately imprisoning. Every time there is some sort of imbalance, that is an imbalance that is due to racism, bigotry, sexism, homophobia of some sort. But that's not true in a free country. It is true that there are after effects to historic discrimination. Of course, that's true. And those after effects have impact on the amount of wealth that certain people have in certain groups. But in a free country in which discrimination is not currently practiced, levels of mobility are not, in fact, dependent on your race. They're not dependent on your group identity. And to discriminate against one group at the expense of another group is to forward discrimination, make discrimination worse. Worst, what happens here is that this leads to crackdowns on actual fundamental rights. So you'll see this argument that is expressed, it was expressed in the New York Times recently, that freedom of speech is being weaponized, that freedom of speech is in and of itself discriminatory, because freedom of speech has created the hierarchy under which we live, the hierarchy has created inequality, therefore freedom of speech is a bad thing. Freedom of speech has actually undermined the quest for equality. You see this with regard to the argument against capitalist economics on behalf of intersectional theorists. What they say is capitalism, freedom, has created inequalities because it is reinforcing a hierarchy, and therefore, if we just get rid of capitalism, then we can get rid of the inequality. Not only is that bad policy, it also involves exactly the sort of invasion of individual rights that the government was created not to do. The government also happens to be really bad at rectifying these imbalances. So whenever the government tries to rectify these imbalances, it tends to make the imbalances even worse in a wide variety of ways. To take a quick example, President Obama, late in his administration, issued a ruling from the executive branch that said that all private contractors with the federal government would no longer be able to look at the criminal records of people who are applying for jobs. What this was designed to do was to increase the number of black people who are employed, because what Obama thought was that statistically there are a larger number of black folks with criminal records. We want to make sure they're employed, so we'll make sure that employers can no longer look at criminal records. What ended up happening is employers instead started using group data. They started looking at black folks and assuming that they were criminals, which is wrong and should not be done, because they could no longer check criminal records. Criminal records allow you to check individuals. The same thing is true with affirmative action. And when it comes to affirmative action, the argument is that black folks in the United States have been historically discriminated against. Therefore, we should set up a system to rectify that imbalance by allowing folks who have lower scores on their SATs or people with worse GPAs to get into particular colleges. The problem is affirmative action actually creates a dropout effect among a lot of black folks who are getting in through affirmative action. Dropout rates of folks who get into particular colleges through affirmative action much higher than the average dropout rate of people who get into that same college without affirmative action. Because it turns out that most people, through SATs and GPA, are going to precisely the college they should probably be going to in the first place. And by the way, where you go to college is not a final determinant of how you do in life. There are plenty of people who go to Harvard who are failures, and there are plenty of people who go to community college who do just fine. Okay, the second group of folks who make a promise to you that government can solve all your problems, these would be the so-called positive rights advocates. This is Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Right, their argument is essentially that government's job is not to protect God-given rights, but that government is the source of all rights. Government is the source of everything good in your life. You didn't build that. Right? The government's job is to protect stuff that we wish we had in a fairer world. It's the government's job to ensure fairness. Now, intersectionality posits fairness between racial and ethnic and sexual orientation groups. The positive rights argument, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders argument, says that everybody should finish up in the same place just as individuals. And the only way to do that is to see the government as the source of rights. So for those of us who are what we call negative rights advocates, who believe that the only rights that you actually have in a state of nature are rights from other people, meaning that I have a right for you not to kill me, I have a right for you not to steal my property, I have a right against you that you're not allowed to invade my freedom of speech, right? These are negative rights that the government is supposed to protect because they're rights that exist in the absence of you harming me. The left believes in positive rights, right, which says that right to housing, right to health care, right to education, right to all sorts of things in which they get to point a gun at somebody and force that person to provide something for you. Right? The negative rights argument operates in a world of what they call in economics Pareto efficiency. In other words, we are seeking a system in which everyone is better off without making anyone worse off. But that's not the world of the positive rights argument. The positive rights argument operates in a world of redistributive justice. Right? This is the sloganeering you hear from all your professors about social justice. Right? We have to seek social justice. So this is the idea of redistributive justice is pushed by philosophers like John Rawls, who you'll hear from if you take a philosophy or poli-sci course here, I'm sure. And his basic concept is that true justice can only be achieved when all inequalities that you are born into or experience throughout your life are gotten rid of. That we have to level the final outcome of any particular situation. This is why Bernie Sanders, who is an advocate of this, spends all of his time talking about inequalities in society, right? Because we all agree that inequalities exist, but then he says that the fact that an inequality exists means the government ought to do something about it. Why are so many people wealthy in this country when so few people have health care? Right? The idea that he's saying there is that the country is only just if you force some people to pay the bills of other people. Now, the positive rights argument places obligations on others that they don't actually have in a world of negative rights. So when people say there's a right to health care, sounds really nice. It means that health care is going to be provided, right? Well, not unless you're actually willing, in the end, to point a gun at a doctor and force that doctor to provide care at a price of your choosing. Because if there's any opt-out, then you don't have a right to health care. You have to force people to do this. The same thing is true with regard to the so-called duty to serve at bakeries, for example. You've seen the left say that I have a duty to serve you. You walk in my bakery, I have to serve you, violating my own religious precepts in the process because I have a right to your services. You don't have a right to my services. But according to the positive rights advocates, you do. And this is supposed to fix all of your problems. Okay, none of this actually fixes everybody's problems because here is the problem with this. Okay, the essence of positive rights is force. The essence of civil society and social fabric is voluntarism. You want a happy, thriving society? You allow people to do what they want. You want an upset, angry society? You force people to do what you want. The positive rights argument forces people to do the things you want at their expense. Their individual rights become less important than your desire for crap. You don't get to do that in a free and open society. So when politicians promise you they're going to provide you a right to health care, understand they can only do that by forcing somebody else to do something that they do not want to do. Furthermore, force tends to erode the entrepreneurial spirit and to achieve the opposite of its intended effect. Because if you believe there's a right to something, it turns out that forcing people to do it means less of it. Right? When you force people to do things, they don't want to do it anymore. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez today, for example, she was railing against Amazon moving into Queens. And she was doing it on one basis that was actually rather solid, which is crony capitalism is bad, governments shouldn't be paying off corporations to move into their areas. That's correct. She's correct about that. And then she was doing it on a basis that was not solid, which she was saying it was going to force up the price of rent. Well, the reason it was going to force up the price of rent is because people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez believe that everyone has a right to housing. And the way they then establish that right to housing is by trying to force corporations to pay for the housing. Corporations don't want to pay for the housing, so they leave. So no one pays for the housing. And then they say, well, there's not enough housing, so what we really ought to do is rent control. We ought to force people to rent out at a price that we want a piece of property to you. Except what happens then is that no one builds any new properties, because if you can't make a profit on a new property, why the hell would you build it in the first place? So the actual policy that was intended to make things more just and more equitably distributed ends up with fewer units of housing and fewer people with actual housing. The positive rights argument ends up with less of everything unless you are willing to tax a bunch of people at exorbitant rates and violate their rights in doing so. Finally, we reach the third version of the government can solve everything for you argument. And this is the argument that you sometimes see in the Republican Party. And it predates President Trump, although President Trump engages in it. It goes all the way back to compassionate conservatism. This idea that government can solve all social problems if it just sort of meddles around the edges. If government just sort of involves itself in a few key ways, then we can fix all of your problems. This is the do-gooder argument. So the argument here is a little bit different, kind of in the same vein as the positive rights argument, but the main argument is that strong families and social fabric cannot exist without governmental intervention. Right? This is the argument that President Trump sometimes makes. He says there are dying areas in the United States. If we don't provide jobs for dying small towns with dying industries, then the family is going to collapse there, and then those communities collapse, and then you can't have a functioning social fabric, so government has to step in and do something about it. Now, it is true that you need families and functioning social institutions in order to have a social fabric. But if you believe that families collapse because industries die, then I urge you to talk to humans. Okay, families have collapsed in the United States not because of lack of jobs. Lack of jobs has actually followed lack of families. It's the other way around. People don't get married for the tax break. And this leads to policies like the idea that we're going to give an earned income tax credit for a child tax credit for people who have a kid. And there's not a person in America or world history who has ever had a child just for the tax credit. That's not the way this works. Nor do people get married because tax credits are available. The same thing is true when we talk about communities in which politicians promise they're going to bring back jobs that have fled, right? All we have to do is put a tariff here or a tariff there or a subsidy here or a subsidy there. All we have to do is ban a new technology, and suddenly all the jobs will return. Well, this obviously undercuts the individual freedom, property ownership, right to alienate labor that we talked about right at the top. Now, it is true that all of the measures that I'm talking about can help a certain small group of people at the expense of an enormous broader group of people. This is true for tariffs particularly, but it's also true of laws that would reduce technological innovation. I talked to Tucker Carlson recently on my program, and Tucker actually made the overt case that he would ban automatic driving in order to save truck driver jobs, which is essentially being a Luddite. Right? For those of you who recall your high school history days, the Luddites were a group of folks in the 19th century who actually went around smashing machines in order to save jobs in industries that were threatened by the presence of these machines. It is true, you can save jobs in that industry that way. You can also radically increase the price of doing business for everybody else who is doing that sort of business, make them non-competitive on the global stage, and make consumers pay more at the other end. And turns out those consumers also have families. Turns out those families also need jobs. And those businesses also need to thrive. You can't take from one person and give to the other and then suggest that you're making everybody better off, because you are not, in fact, making everybody better off. All of these attempts to strengthen families, strengthen churches by getting the government involved, right, they actually undercut individual freedom, and they bring us closer to that positive rights regime in which you are guaranteed a job. You know what you're really guaranteed in the United States when it comes to economic opportunity? You are guaranteed an adventure. You are guaranteed an opportunity, but you have to make the right choices. So what exactly can government do? What government can do is get the hell out of the way. Right? This is the conservative case. The government can remove barriers to success, useless, counterproductive regulations. The government can stop, politicians can stop polarizing us on the basis of group identity for political gain. The government can create educational programs that don't suck as much as the ones that currently exist. We can stop the crony capitalism that benefits large corporations at the expense of small ones, which is what we're actually seeing with Amazon in Crystal City and New York City now. What we cannot do is pretend that government is a cure-all. When a politician says to you that government's going to fix your problem, politician's lying to you. Government is the problem. You, the individual, are the cure. The cure to poverty in the United States is simple. Graduate high school, don't have babies out of wedlock, get a full-time job. That is the cure to poverty. 75% of all people in the poorest income quintile will be in the middle income or upper income quintile within 20 years if they exit that quintile by making these basic decisions. And you are all capable of making these decisions. And guess what? Government policy has nothing to do with it. You can all finish high school, because finishing high school in the United States basically means knowing how to write your name half correctly. Right? You can not have babies out of wedlock. Just don't put that thing there without that other thing on it, guys. And you can get a full-time job, because it turns out there are 7.5 million unfilled jobs in the United States. And this notion that you are guaranteed a job in your hometown is sheer bunk and anti-American to boot. Okay, the entire history of the United States is people getting in covered wagons and going into places nobody had ever explored before, and then trying to set up a life at risk of death. Right? That was the history of the United States. Now you hear from folks that you have a right to have a job in the town where you grew up because your parents are buried there. And there's nothing about American history that suggests that the pioneering spirit ought to die just because there's no more prairie. Okay, the reality is that your adventure still lies out there on the horizon, and you ought to be willing to move, and you ought to be willing to go there and take advantage of opportunities that may not exist in your hometown. And if that means that you need a community to help lift you up, then the community should help lift you up. If that means you need neighbors to help pay your bus fare and your first month of rent, then you should have neighbors that do that. You should be involved in building of a social fabric. Government can't replace that social fabric, by the way. You have to involve yourself in the social fabric. When government tries to replace the social fabric, all it does is create dependency. You know why? Because you feel a feeling of debt to your family and to your neighbors. When your parents do something for you, you know where the money came from. When your neighbors do something for you, you know where the money came from. You know where the help came from. So involve yourself in your family. Involve yourself in your community. Now, does government have a role in taking care of people who fall through the cracks, through no fault of their own? Sure, local government can act as a backstop in the most dire circumstances. I mean, this goes all the way back to the founders. Benjamin Franklin said, "I'm for doing good to the poor. I think the best way of doing good to the poor is not making them easy in poverty, but leading or driving them out of it," which is exactly what conservatism is about. And conservatism posits that there are a series of steps you should go through if, in fact, you have fallen through the cracks, if you need help. Right? If you need help, you first go to your family, then you go to your religious community, then you go to your local community, then you go to your local government, then you go to your state, and finally, at the very end, you go to the feds. We don't do any of that now. We just go straight to the federal government, and we demand a handout. That doesn't create any sense of duty, it doesn't create any sense of obligation, and it doesn't create any sense that you actually need to go out and repay the debt that you have now incurred because you had to take advantage of somebody else helping you out. Charity is supposed to start at home, and taking charity is supposed to start at home too. The bottom line is that any politician who promises you they can solve your problems is lying to you about what America is at a fundamental, root level. In America, your future is in your hands. It's a free country. Your community is in your hands. And anyone who tells you different is indeed lying to you or looking for you to trade your liberty for a little temporary security, or more importantly, a little of their temporary job security. So don't believe in the big lie. You can believe in yourself. You're all smart in this room. You're capable in this room. You are a unique human being made in God's image. That gives you rights, and those rights are what allow you to be great. Believe in a country that gives you the freedom to explore that horizon. Be a pioneer. It's your state motto that says, with God, all things are possible. Not with government, with God. And with a little self-confidence. With the rights that God gave us, and a government enshrined to protect, not invade those rights, even with the best of intentions, we can go forward to victory and a better day. Thanks so much. Well, now the fun part. All righty. So, Q&A time. Now's the fun part. That wasn't so bad, right, guys? Nobody had to go to, like, the Hurt Feelings Center or something?
Hey, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. Before we get started with the Q&A session of tonight's event, I just want to go over a few rules. Before you stand up, just keep in mind, if you're going to come up for a question, you're seated here in the front rows, please move toward the back and then come in from the back as opposed to cutting me off here in the front. Secondly, I'm going to ask that when you come up, please stand on this pink X that's marked on the floor so we can get a good shot and you look all nice and pretty and skinny for the camera. And third and lastly, just keep your questions to a minimum of one. If Mr. Shapiro responds to your question and allows you to have a rebuttal, then you would be allowed to. But please keep the questions at one per person because we are on time crunch here. And please no follow-up questions. So,
and also, I do have one more rule that I repeat at all lectures. If you disagree with me, raise your hand, you go to the front of the line.
Perfect. All right. Melissa, do you want to bring him up? Just stand right there.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for braving the 30-degree weather to come to Ohio. I wanted to ask you a little bit about energy policy. In particular, I'd really love to see the look on the Democrats' face when we solve clean energy through free market solutions, particularly like advanced nuclear power. You know, we've got these technologies that have been available really since the 1960s, and they've been held back by these ridiculous regulations that have been put in place that, you know, it takes 10 years to get a new nuclear plant licensed. And, you know, the estimates are that these would cost significantly less than coal. produce almost no nuclear waste. They can't melt down, things like that. And I'm curious in terms of, with Trump doing a lot of bringing in kind of the regulatory state and these ridiculous regulations that don't actually keep us safer, what your thoughts are on like advanced nuclear power.
Well, I mean, I think obviously, look, France runs on advanced nuclear power. There are countries in Europe that run on cleaner sources of energy, particularly nuclear power. And it is true that the United States was the #1 country in cutting emissions in the last year when it comes to carbon emissions, largely because of fracking replacing coal. So natural gas fracking is significantly less emitting than is the use of coal and coal energy. The market is solving a lot of these problems. It is also worthwhile noting that over time, human ingenuity has a pretty solid way of overcoming a lot of the environmental catastrophes that were supposed to destroy humanity over the last half century. And Paul Ehrlich was claiming that we were all going to starve by 1980, basically. And that all was nonsense because human ingenuity is an amazing, amazing thing. It's also true that the IPCC estimates about climate change over the course of the coming century, even if you hold that those are true, that may not actually necessitate the sort of government interventionism that the left is claiming, which would be extraordinarily heavy and intrusive. In fact, the folks who just won the Nobel Prize in economics made a pretty solid case that only at a higher limit than what we are currently projecting would it be worthwhile for us to get involved in the sort of catastrophic solutions that people are talking about. We actually have to balance out economic growth with all of this. I think that people are looking for more green energy solutions or cleaner energy solutions. As you say, the technology has been available for quite a while, and it is counterproductive in the extreme. States like California haven't built a new power plant since like 1970, and California continues to instead rely on older forms of energy that pollute more. So there's no logic to that.
How's it going, Ben? So, granted, I'd like to preface my comments first by saying I think your commentary is very valuable to the political discourse in the United States, and I think it's a shame that your commentary is really sensationalized and taken out of context and that's so frequently.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. So I have a question on the...
And I see you're a Bernie supporter, correct?
In a sense, not in the typical way that you described.
I'm not going to parody you for it, but no, I was actually going to thank you as somebody who disagrees for coming out tonight because that's a really good thing.
I appreciate it.
I mean, I may make fun of you a little bit, but
okay. Okay, so this is my question on a little bit of a different time horizon here. So over the last couple of years, I've been quite weary of the growing sympathy for socialism and the bashing of capitalism overall, especially considering the massive increase in global health metrics during a time when capitalism has been the predominant economic paradigm. More recently, I've been doing more reading on technological disruption as it relates to politics and economics. I read Yuval Noah Harari's new book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and granted, I probably changed some of my opinions regarding the socialization of more services, considering what he calls the development of the useless class, and also the our abilities to innovate in the fields of science and technology faster than we are able to reason and politic on these new developments. In the past, you've mentioned the conditions which you would support universal basic income or other more socialized services. However, these systems, it doesn't seem as if these policy developments are ones where we can just flip the switch and voila, universal basic income will will certainly work. So I guess, does it require progressive policies socializing more services over time to accommodate technological disruption as they unfold? And do you find that this is a more reasonable reason to support socialism today? And if not, what indicators would you look for to determine that it is the appropriate time to begin the process of developing more socialized systems?
Well, I mean, in terms of developing socialized systems, I think that we have to distinguish here between the one aspect of socialism, which is redistributionism, and another, which is social control of the means of production. I almost never believe in social control of the means of production because I think that results in non-Pareto optimal solutions that ends up benefiting certain groups at the expense of other groups and killing efficiency. The idea of redistribution of a certain amount of income, when I've talked about universal basic income, what I've said is that at a time when we reach the eventuality that millions and millions and millions of people are out of jobs because machines have replaced all of them and they have no capacity to work in any functional forum, that at that point you're going to have some sort of basic income that is available to all people. I will admit I am very skeptical that that is right around the corner, just because we've been told that this is right around the corner every time there's a new technological development. Now, granted, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will be the time. Maybe there will be, we have reached the singularity, and technology is going to put everyone with an IQ below 115 out of work or something. And if that's the case, then I've said that universal basic income would probably become a necessity at that point if you actually wish to have a peaceful society. But with that said, I don't think that that's a process that can be gradual without actually disincentivizing people to work. You've seen that they've tried universal basic income schemes in certain areas of Canada and certain areas of Europe. They've actually had to undo them because they've created such a disincentive to work. I think they recently tried it in Ontario, and it was a failure. So universal basic income can only be achieved when we basically despair of the capacity of a certain class of human beings to work. I've not despaired of that capacity to work, and it seems to me that as technology improves, what this has done is it's also created new capacities for people to work. I mean, right now, technology, people talk about technology putting a lot of people out of jobs. We have 7.5 million unfilled jobs in the United States right now at a time when we've complained about technology putting a lot of people in small towns out of work. So I don't think that we've reached that point. I think that's a last-ditch attempt. I also think that in the end, the attempt to help out other people primarily, as I've said before, should be a voluntaristic one. I mean, in my religious community, this is why I'm very big on the idea of close-knit communities, particularly religious communities, picking up for each other and helping each other. And the idea of an overarching government coming in and blowing all of those communities out of the water with a big footing process, I think actually undercuts the social fabric and leads to jealousy and rancor and a lot of rage.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Pardon me for the coughing. I'm like Hillary Clinton up here. I promise I'm not. And just like Hillary Clinton, I'm perfectly healthy, guys. Perfectly healthy.
Thank everybody for their questions. Just a reminder, please keep your questions to Ben short and in the form of a question as we continue. We're kind of pressed for time, and we want to make it available for as many people as possible to speak. So take it away, man.
Oh, sorry. quick question. So about affirmative action, you say that you don't support that at all. And so just a quick scenario, say you have two students, one that comes from like a lower level impoverished area, and they graduate high school but with like a 2.0 and lower ACT scores. What do you have to say about maybe a student who gets a 3.0 from a great school and they get into a lot better schools? Do you think that admissions offices should do something about that?
No, I think that in the only case in which I would believe that this should be a deciding factor is if the person has the same ACT and GPA. So for example, somebody's from a low-income area and they've experienced more life challenges, but they've somehow overcome all that to achieve the same GPA and ACT as the person who's come from a place with less challenges. That seems like a material factor to take into consideration. The problem is that there's no good metric for determining when all things are, that's an easy situation because it's all other things being equal, right? But in a case where not all other things are equal, how do you exactly measure for how much of a burden was overcome that caused you to have a 2.0 GPA and a lower ACT score overall? And again, one of the big problems with affirmative action is that it tends to be counterproductive. What it leads to is folks going to, like a person who would have been very successful at Cal State Los Angeles going to UCLA and then failing at UCLA as opposed to Cal State Los Angeles. Or in this case, a person who would have been really successful at Michigan going instead to OSU and failing out, right? Because so the point is that if you actually want to create good educational policies, those policies don't begin with affirmative action or end with affirmative action. The real problems we have in our education system go a lot deeper. They go all the way back to elementary school, failures of localism, in many cases failure of parenting. The reality is that the number one indicator that a child is going to have educational trouble is lack of a father in the home. If you have a single mom, that mom has to work more. She's not at home as much. There are certain communities, black and white, virtually of every color, where education is just not valued in the same way as in other communities. I can say that the Jewish community historically has valued education very highly, which is why the Jewish community has always tended to overperform in that area. The same has been said in areas of the Asian community, which is why affirmative action programs at Harvard are disadvantaging not white students, but Asian students mostly. This sort of stuff is inappropriate. It's not the job of government to step in and rectify imbalances in life. It is the job of people to make the best decisions that they possibly can and for us to get government out of the way of success.
Thank you.
Hi, I would like to ask you about something you said in your podcast today, I believe it was, about immigration and how if we just have open borders or just open them or more, I guess, that a lot of immigrants will come in and basically just change our values and our American ideals. But I would disagree with that because, I mean, those ideals are written into our Constitution. They're kind of ingrained. And to change that would require, you know, an amendment that would be an immense amount of work that immigrants just coming over couldn't.
Well, can we start with the
accomplish.
basic premise? I mean, the basic premise is that people around the world have different values. Not everybody has the same set of values, right? Mm-hmm. So if a group of people come in from an area where people have different values, that's presumably going to have some impact on the community, unless they change their values to adapt to the community into which they are integrating.
I mean, that's how we were like built, right?
Right, and one of the reasons that we were built that way is actually specifically because of lack of a big government system. So a big government system actually creates a disincentive to assimilate. So when my great-grandparents got to the United States in 1907, when they got here, they didn't speak English. They came from a place where they basically had nothing, and there was no welfare system in New York at the time. And so they quickly had to learn English. They had to assimilate to the culture. They had to assimilate to the lifestyle. And this led to a greater level of assimilation because people were legitimately leaving behind property in countries they were coming from to come to a place where they had nothing, specifically to adventure. Right, specifically to try and grow a new life here without the help of a government. Well, one of the big problems that we have is vision of government. Right now, there are polls that show that a lot of immigrants who are coming in have a different vision of what government ought to be. They think that the government ought to be bigger, it ought to provide more social services, and they believe that because they come from countries where the government purports to do exactly that. If people aren't assimilating, that is a problem for the predominant culture in the United States, and I think that that's a bad thing. Like, I'm not talking about the cultural mores that make America more fun, make us richer, you know, diet, religious differences, you know, stuff like that. I'm talking about root values as far as what you think the government should do for you, or how social fabrics should be built, or how men and women should treat each other, because that's very different around the world. And if you refuse to acknowledge those differences in an immigration policy, you will end up with a lot of people coming in to take advantage of the fact that it's a pretty freaking great place to live, and then people refusing to assimilate on the basis of that. And in fact, this is what you've seen in Europe, right? You've seen huge populations coming from the Middle East who are not actually particularly ensconced in Western values and creating enclaves in a lot of Western European countries. And this has led to a backlash in terms of far-right governments being elected in places like Norway and Sweden, not on an economic basis, but on a cultural basis, right? Trying to crack down on that sort of immigration.
If they're also able to change our values, we would probably could convince them that the American ideals that we are based off of are the right way to go.
So I agree that we have the capacity in the United States to help change people's values. But the problem is that when we determine who gets to come in the country and who does not get to come in the country, the burden is on people to show that they should be able to come in the country. It is not on us to convert people coming into the country. Sorry about that, yeah. Sorry, like Jim Acosta, you too can hold the mic.
Hey, don't karate chop me, all right?
I'll be quick. So, like, walking in here has been like the Pavlov's dog experiment because I've been hungry since I heard you speak, and I realized I only listen to you on lunch break. So, thank you for being part of, like, my afternoons, Monday through Friday.
I appreciate you listening.
Yeah, so, like, there's only, like, really one thing that bothers the hell out of me about you, and I'm just going to lay it all on the line. So, like, here it goes. All right. How can you rank Rogue One ahead of Return of the Jedi on your Star Wars list? I just need to know right now. Please tell me.
Okay. So the answer is that half of Return of the Jedi is a great movie and half of it is garbage. Right? The half of the Return of the Jedi that has to do with Luke and Darth Vader and the Emperor is fantastic. All that stuff is some of the best stuff in Star Wars canon.
I agree, yep.
Okay, and everything with the Ewoks is just terrible. Right? Everything on Endor is just bad, right? That stuff is bad. And so, and Rogue One, I was like, the first time I saw it, I didn't love it. And then the second time I saw it, I liked it more because it lent a certain weight to the Star Wars saga without taking away from it. Now, maybe I'm grading a little bit on a curve just because all the new Star Wars movies, except for that one, kind of suck. And when I say kind of suck, I mean The Force Awakens murdered my childhood. And then The Last Jedi proceeded to take the moldering body of my childhood, drag it out of the grave, set it on fire, and distribute the ashes to the wind.
It was so bad.
But
all I want to tell you is, like, the father-son bonding in Return of the Jedi puts that above the ancillary characters of Rogue One. Like,
okay, and that I hear as part of the initial. It's a good argument. It's a good argument as part of the value to the canon. I will agree that Return of the Jedi is more valuable to the canon in terms of the actual consistent nature of the quality of the film, Rogue One is a better film on I think, an objective level than Return of the Jedi. But Return of the Jedi's, Luke and Darth Vader stuff is more emotionally affecting, obviously.
Thank you for your time.
What's up, Mac?
No question, that was the most important question of the evening.
Hey, Ben. I just wanted to say thank you for doing what you do. I listen to your show Monday through Friday. It's awesome. You mentioned in your speech that government is not there to solve your problems. So someone like yourself who's been very successful in your career, I guess what is some of the biggest advice you could give to somebody who's in college on how to be successful in life? And also, can I shake your hand?
Sure, on the second, although I am sick, so I will warn you that there are consequences to doing so. But as far as the, I'm patient zero. But as far as, as I'm glad you're willing to die for me, dude. That means a lot to me. But as far as advice that I would give to college students, life is a series of decisions. If you make a bunch of good decisions in a row, then things work out really well. And that means making responsible decisions that very often are based not on what you want to do, but what you think is the smartest thing to do. And what I mean by that is when it comes to career choice, for example, people from the time you've been a child have been telling you to follow your dreams. Okay? Your dreams don't pay you. Right? Lots of people dream of being, a center fielder for the Cleveland Indians. Very few of them achieve this particular goal. Following your dreams is sometimes a recipe for failure. Making responsible and virtuous decisions, however, is a recipe for success. And that's really all you can do in this life is make those decisions. When it comes to career, what I've always suggested to people is that you need to fulfill a couple of basic functions in career choice. One, pick something that you love, and there's more than one thing. Two, pick something you're good at, because there are lots of people who love something they're really, really terrible at. Right? The Antifa protesters outside, for example. And number three, pick something that is valuable to somebody else and they are willing to pay you for. If you can find the career that checks all three of those boxes, then you will be successful. Also, recognize that the economy of today is not the economy of our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation. There's going to be a lot of mobility. Right? I've changed jobs since I graduated law school. I've had 6 different jobs. I've changed jobs a lot. And the reason for that is I've never been fired, thank God, but there are all situations in which I moved from one career to another because I saw a better opportunity. And people are more and more mobile. People have to move to find opportunity. And also, then all of this falls under one basic concept, which is be goal-oriented. And I mean this in terms of career. I certainly mean this in terms of relationships as well. I think that people date stupidly. I think people date like idiots. I think they find somebody they think is attractive, like, oh, I'd like to date that person. Well, what are you dating them for? Right? I mean, it depends on your goal, I suppose. But if you have a virtuous goal and you're not a piece of then what you should be dating people for is a long-term relationship and or marriage, presumably the latter. If that's the case, then there's a certain number of boxes that have to be checked, particularly a values box. Obviously, attraction has to be part of it, but when it comes to dating, people do the wrong thing. They make attraction the whole thing, and they're like, oh, my girlfriend's so hot, but we disagree on everything. Why should I stay with her? I don't know. Do you want to be miserable for the next 60 years? Because it turns out in 50 years, she ain't going to be that hot anymore. So you may want to think a little bit about your long-term policy. Same thing for you, ladies. Turns out that stud, all those muscles can be sagging within 25 years. So, although I will acknowledge that fewer women are dating for the studly element than men are dating for women's looks, because men and women, unfortunately for all of the leftist advocates, men and women are inherently different, particularly on matters of sex. So, now, if you're in the audience, do not shake that man's hand. So.
Hello, Ben. I'm a big fan of watching a whole lot of your videos. In particular, I like on YouTube, Ben Shapiro dismantles college leftists.
Yeah. Ben Shapiro dismembers leftists, buries him in unmarked grave.
See him all the time. It's perfect. It's golden. My question is about the fate of Western civilization.
So light stuff, okay.
Right, exactly. Yeah, just what you wanted. So certain conservative thinkers like Jonah Goldberg have said the West is committing suicide. I know Stefan Molyneux, he drew some parallels between modern Western civilization and the fall of the Roman Empire. So my question is simply, do you believe that Western civilization is in decline?
I think that there's no question European civilization is in decline. I mean, Europe has decided that it doesn't have values worth fighting for, and that it values sort of temporary comfort over the preservation of those values over the long haul, is why they're not having babies, they're importing labor, they're undercutting their own culture with an ethos of multiculturalism. It's why Emmanuel Macron says that being nationalistic is suddenly a terrible, terrible thing. All of this speaks to a certain lack of understanding of basic Western values. I think that the United States has a better shot, but that's because it's really fascinating. I have this sort of argument with both Jonah and some of the what I call neo-Enlightenment thinkers. I don't think I coined that term, but this would be Steven Pinker, Sam Harris, some of the guys who are very into the Enlightenment. I like the Enlightenment too. It's great. But I will say that folks who think that the Enlightenment sprang from nothing and that the way that Western civilization is going to persevere is by re-embracing Enlightenment values in an era where we've basically cut the feet out from under those same Enlightenment values, I think that's a little bit short-sighted. So this is actually what my new book is on. So if you're worried about the fate of Western civilization, then next year I have a book that will save it. But the basic concept is that if you actually want to preserve Western civilization, the chief way of doing this is by re-embracing Judeo-Christian values and acting in accordance with those values. And one of those values is reason, right? There are certain basic values that Judeo-Christianity combined with Greek rationality brought to the world. That was the foundation of Western civilization. We've lost both. We've lost rationality to feelings, obviously, and we have lost Judeo-Christian values to a sort of either hedonism or to a subjectivism that suggests that you can make up your own profound values. People really suck at making up their own values. They're really bad at it. And the last 2 centuries have been good proof of that.
Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, thank you for your work. And following up to my question, how do you deal with demonization from both sides? As a Latino moral scholar who also happens to be Jewish, there's also demonization from both sides, in the sense that conservatives find you less qualified because they associate you with the moral scholars people and the Latinos in that group, and liberals find you kind of bad just because you're a libertarian.
Well, I mean, look, I think that I'm more of the right than of the left, so I have a fair number of fans on the right, obviously. There are fans on the left, I think, who appreciate the fact that I try to make a rational argument, but like, if you're, as they say, if you're not taking flak, you're not above the target. So I think the fact that there are a lot of people who dislike me is counterbalanced by the fact that there are a lot of people who do like me. I have never been one who cares particularly much about popularity. If I had, high school been real rough. But it's, I think that the reason that there are some people it depends how you define the right. I think that the mainstream philosophical conservatives are pretty much in line with me. I think that a lot of folks on the left don't like me because they are, because they don't like anybody on the right. I mean, for the same, I mean, legitimately, like they can't name a good conservative unless that conservative voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I did not vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016 because I'm not a crazy person, and thus folks on the left are not particularly fond. So, asking people, hey, I didn't vote for Trump either, by the way. Asking folks, why they dislike me, it hurts me. I don't know. I feel like I like me, and I think that that's the important thing in the end, isn't it? I think we can all agree.
Hi, Ben. Big fan of the show and the Tumblr, obviously. So I had a question, and if you don't mind, a quick follow-up about your views on Israel and as it pertains to the Jewish people. And I'd like to preface this by saying that I think that Israel is a great ally in that area of the world and ultimately a force for good. However, so you seem to conflate disapproval for Israel's actions with anti-Semitism a lot, and it seems a lot like the identity politics that we all despise, and it seems just a bit ideologically inconsistent to me. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on that?
So my feeling is that it is perfectly fair game to criticize Israel's policies on the same basis that you would criticize any other country's policies. Where I begin to think that it's anti-Semitism is if you are criticizing Israel for things you would never criticize any other country for. So to take an example, today Israel was hit by 400 rockets. Right? No country on earth would stand being hit by 400 rockets without going in full bore and knocking out as many of the enemy targets as humanly possible. There are going to be a lot of folks on the left who, over the next few days, when Israel retaliates, are going to suggest that Israel, the big bad Goliath in the Middle East, has engaged in some sort of war crime in answering for itself. This, to me, smacks of anti-Semitism, because the only reason to target the Jews on this one would be because of their identity, not because of a policy that any other country would not stand for. So, I mean, by the way, that's the State Department definition of anti-Semitism as well. So there are two basic. So when people say they're not for the existence of the State of Israel, that's anti-Semitism in the sense that every other group on earth, you're fine with having a state, including the Palestinians. But when it comes to the Israelis, then all of a sudden, no. Also, if you treat the Jewish state in a way you would treat no other state, then this is an element of anti-Semitism. But if you're just criticizing an Israeli policy, or something bad happened at a checkpoint, or I've criticized Israeli policy too. For example, I think they were idiots to withdraw from the Gaza Strip in 2007. I think that was a huge mistake that handed over a swath of territory to a terrorist group, and they've been answering rockets ever since. It was in 2006. I think that you can criticize Israeli policy without being anti-Semitic. However, again, if you are singling out the Jews for criticism, specifically in a way that you would criticize nobody else, at that point you have to ask whether that is motivated by something deeper.
And if you don't mind a quick follow-up?
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So in my opinion, the Israeli attacks on the USS Liberty on June 8th, 1967.
Okay, so I mean,
Yeah.
the United States has forcibly rebutted the idea that this was a purposeful attack on the USS Liberty. So you can go against the U.S. government. I mean, the U.S. government obviously doesn't want this to be a thing. There's other information out there to suggest, again, if we want to get into sort of theories as to what happened to the USS Liberty, there was other information to suggest that in an effort to create a stalemate, the USS Liberty had been actually funneling Israeli movements to the Egyptians. At the same time, there's a book called The Secret War on the Jews by a guy named Loftus who's written about this. I'm not sure I believe that theory, but if I don't believe that theory, then I'm going to believe the American government, which basically says this was a mistake, it shouldn't have happened, the Israeli government has apologized for it, and I mean, the United States legitimately hits its own soldiers in friendly fire incidents, so it doesn't seem that far outside the realm of possibility that allies would also engage in a friendly fire incident. That's quite terrible. Listen, it's awful.
So you read part of the email from the Moral Scholars Office of Diversity and Inclusion today. And it's a good example of the bias that the higher-ups in the university have here, and the same bias that's taken over all the universities across the U.S. YAF's here trying to change bias among the students. How do conservatives take back the administration in academia and make the university a place for free thought again? Is that even possible?
I mean, it's very difficult. One of the reasons that it's very difficult is because, particularly in the professoriate, you have to have your dissertation approved by another professor. All these professors happen to be on the left. So they're not going to approve a dissertation about why the wage gap is fake, which, by the way, it is. The wage gap is fake. But if you write a dissertation about it, or if you write a dissertation about how men are men and women are women, and a man can't become a woman, and a woman can't become a man, and there's no such thing as a magical sex change machine, right? If you write a dissertation on that, you're not going to get a PhD at a major university, which means the only real way to take back the university system, there are three ways you can do it. One is you start rivals. You start actual private colleges like Hillsdale or Liberty, right, that are dedicated to teaching certain conservative principles. Way number two is that you infiltrate. You basically fib about your politics or avoid politics until you're in a position of power and you're tenured, and then there's nothing they can do about it. Way number three is you can go become inordinately successful and refuse to give donations until there's some sort of ideological balance at the university level and withdraw alumni funding. All three of these are possibilities. I don't think that, for example, legislation trying to create ideological parity is a safe thing to do. I think whenever the government tries to get involved in mandating particular thought at the university level, it's more dangerous than it is beneficial.
Okay, thanks.
Hi there, Ben. Feels like I have jumped inside of YouTube. So my question
Watch out for the porn, dude.
So as somebody who's not particularly religious, pretty much agnostic, I always hear you talk so passionately on the podcast about issues regarding Israel, and I'm just wondering, could you make like kind of a secular argument for why, like I don't have a dog in the
Sure.
fight,
Yep.
right?
Okay, so the secular argument for Israel, it's the only liberal democracy in the entire region. It's the only democracy that provides any sort of individual rights to anyone in the region. It's been the most consistent and solid of American allies throughout the region. And it also has an incredibly powerful military that provides a footprint and a projection point for American force if, God forbid, the United States had to be involved in the region again. On an ideological level, we should be defending our allies. On a geostrategic level, having a strong state of Israel capable of defending itself is very good for the United States. It's the one place you know there's not going to be a terrorist attack from. And it's also the one place that you know is going to be able to defend the rights of individuals in the region. So for the same reason the United States has a stake in the UK and had a stake in the UK during World War II, the United States has a stake in Israel in the middle of what really is a religious war in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Hi, Ben. Big fan. Thanks for coming out to the Ohio State University. So my question to you is, as an accounting student, I often learn about how we ought to practice what's called like corporate social responsibility, where, and like going off of what you said earlier, we as an individual ought to contribute to the social fabric, to contribute to our communities. And I just want to know your opinion on that. And also, how does that play into the public skepticism towards private charity?
So I think that the idea of corporate social responsibility is the same as the responsibility that you have toward any other human being, which is to treat them with dignity decently. But I think that the constant focus on it implies that corporations are going out of their way to treat people indecently, which in a free society is simply not true. If you have chosen to take a job at a particular corporation at a particular price, this is now your problem. Okay, the fact is that you are freely able to make contracts, and we don't actually want the government getting involved in telling people what sort of contracts they can and cannot make to alienate their labor. This is why when you hear people talking about we need a living wage, well, the answer is that if it were not a living wage, you would be dead, so it would not work. Right? There's no such thing as a non-living wage. And if you want to talk about companies taking advantage of the fact that food stamps are out there to supplement wages, well, then the real question is, why is there a government incentive that allows companies to charge in a free labor market lower wages for a particular piece of work? Now, there are certain things I think that corporations actually should do if they wish to see capitalism flourish in the United States. I think some of those things involve, for example, and I think it would be a good employment practice, going into impoverished areas, downtrodden areas, and saying to kids in those particular areas, if you get good grades and you work hard, then we will subsidize your college education, and then you will get out of college and you will work for us for 3 years and pay off the amount that you owe us. And you will be a good employee, and we will have gotten a good piece of labor out of it, and you will have gotten an opportunity you wouldn't otherwise have. The reason that I think that corporations should do this is because otherwise people look to government to fill that gap, and I think that's unfortunate. I don't think the government should be filling that gap if we can possibly help it. So, again, I think people use corporate social responsibility as a way of just yelling at corporations for engaging in voluntary transactions. That said, if you're a corporation that actually wants to enshrine private property rights, you have to understand that people are either dependent on government or they're dependent on free markets. And the more you can make it clear to people that they are dependent on free markets, the better it is for free markets as a whole.
Thanks.
Hi, Ben. My name is Pammy, and I'm actually the president of College Republicans at Capital University, but our mascot is the Crusaders, and so recently there's been
How dare you?
I know. Well, recently there's been a movement with the students to have the name changed, and I know I personally am against the name change, and I know some other people who are. Like, we see it more of like criticizing like Western civilization more heavily than others, but some of the people who are against it think that it's not something worth fighting. So do you think there's something as the students like that we should voice our opinions about it, or do you think we should just kind of let that slide?
I mean, I think that there's a strategic question and then there's a moral question. So on the moral level, I'm very much against the idea that you can obliterate history simply by just getting rid of things. And also, I think that the attempt to repaint the Crusades as a non-defensive war of aggression is historically inaccurate. I mean, the reality is that Jerusalem had been held by Christians for hundreds of years prior to the Islamic invasions of the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, and that the Islamic invasion of European lands actually necessitated defensive action in some areas. Now, does that mean that the Crusaders didn't do some really terrible things? they absolutely did terrible things, mostly to my people, right? I mean, mostly to Jews, where they were going through Europe and just slaughtering whatever Jew they came upon. Hey, look, the Jew. But with that said, the attempt to recast all of history by saying, well, you can't have a team named the Crusaders, when, like, legitimately, no one who is supporting the Crusaders at a football game is like, you know why I love the Crusaders? You know why? Because that time in 1190, when Richard the Lionheart went in Jerusalem in the Third Crusade and just started slaughtering folks, that was awesome. And now our football team's named after, that's why I like them. Right? Nobody does that. So I think that's foolish. And if you're really that concerned about it, it's a good teachable opportunity. As far as fighting on it, I think that there's a strategic, there is such a thing as strategic withdrawal in certain areas. I'm not sure how much capital politically you want to expend on that particular fight when I think there are more important fights to fight. I think registering your disapproval of the decision is probably a wise move, but I think that turning it into the end of the known universe politically is probably unwise simply because it's too easy to caricature, right? I think that the left likes to caricature these things on a routine basis, I reserve that fight for people who want to remove the cross from public territory, for example, World War I crosses and stuff like that. Again, that's a political calculation, but on a moral level, I see no reason why you should change the name of the Crusaders.
Oh, hi, Ben. May I first off by saying I'm so nervous because you are my idol, and like every morning, I get ready, when I'm getting ready for the day, I rock out to some Shapiro, whether it's Best Moments or Thug Life. So I'm really nervous right now. And may I ask, after my question, may I get a selfie with you?
Sure.
Awesome. Okay, so my question, you're good. I'm starstruck. Okay, so my question is.
Why? I'm not that handsome.
But you're amazing. So my question is, as a young conservative who is studying political science with plans to go to law school, and my ultimate career is to study law and go into politics, and I'm looking at the political atmosphere right now as it's getting violent, as Scalise was shot, Rand Paul was beaten up in his own house. What would you say as advice or a suggestion for a young conservative getting ready to go into this atmosphere that I want to change, but it's insanely...
It's very difficult. I mean, I think that number one, I do think there will be a better day here. I think people are getting very tired of this. I really do. I think across the country, people are starting to reject the sort of overwrought politics that we've seen with people beating each other up and confronting each other in restaurants and all the rest of it. I don't think it can last like this indefinitely. So that's number one. Number two, never tweet. Right? Now, like, I know it's tempting right now to be on social media, but when I was your age, I was writing columns, and half the things I was writing were stupid because I was 17, 18 years old. And I think that, you know, it is important. Now's a good learning time, but it's not necessarily the best time to spill your thoughts publicly unless you really think that they are fully formed. As far as, you know, the political sphere, you really have to build up a thick skin. And even though I tend to be a pretty thick-skinned person, you know, that goes all the way back to high school when I was viciously bullied, you know, building up a thick skin in politics is a very difficult thing. And if you're a good person, your first tendency when someone criticizes you is to say, is there accuracy to the criticism? What can I do better in the future? The problem is in politics, most of the criticism is in bad faith. A lot of the criticism is in bad faith. And you have to understand that going in. So that means building up self-confidence. It means reading enough to be solid in your opinions. You know, you're at an age when you have the opportunity to really know what it is that you think and back what it is that you think all the way down to the root level and know the different permutations of your belief system. If you can do all of those things, then I think that you'll be a tremendous credit to the conservative movement and to the country. But we do need thick-skinned people who are willing to punch and who know enough to punch, because I think ignorant punching is sometimes counterproductive. I won't name any names about ignorant punching, yeah, I know, everybody's mouthing it. But the fact is that if you can punch in an effective way, then you'll be an asset to the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm mostly excited because that's the only photo where I've ever been taller than anybody.
Okay, you got it. Hi, Ben. How's it going? My name's Aaron Carpenter. I'm a student here at Ohio State, and I also write for the Washington Examiner as a contributor.
Oh, cool.
So a couple weeks ago, you tweeted, quote, Note to President Trump, the media are not the enemy of the people. Also a note to the media, President Trump is not the enemy of the people, which sparked a bipartisan bipartisan backlash and an interesting conversation on Twitter. So it's no secret that, that the president has his qualms with the media. But President Trump is on record stating that the fake news media is the true enemy of the people, not the media. To a lot of people, and most notably Trump supporters, there's a huge difference between the media, who do their jobs correctly and report honestly and dutifully, like I try to do, and the fake news media who purposely create false stories and narratives that further create the division in our country. Do you stand by your note to the president, or do you?
I do, and the reason that I do is because the president is rather inexact in his use of the term fake news media, meaning that the president will use it for anything he doesn't like. This is the problem. So if he were to just be attacking particular stories that are fake news because they are out there, or biased news because that is fairly universal, then I'm very much in his favor, although I do think that suggesting that news media that report fake news are quote unquote the enemy of the people. I don't like the phrase enemy of the people because it has Stalinist, history and overtones. But with that said, are they doing a disservice to the American people? Absolutely. The problem is that President Trump has legitimately said things like polls that don't go in his favor should not be believed. And the president has said things that have turned out to be true were falsely reported. So if the president were, I think, exact in his use of the methodology, listen, I'm a guy who went on CNN in the middle of the Gaza war in 2014, and I said that if Hamas could have created a news network, it would look exactly like CNN. Right? I'm the guy, right? Like, I'm more than happy to go on the media and rip on how terrible the media are at their jobs. I do it pretty much every day on my show. But I try to be exact in when I think the media are not telling the truth and who exactly is not telling the truth and when they are being inaccurate. I think the president is a lot looser with that sort of thing. I mean, this is the same guy who said that the National Enquirer did great service when it was talking about JFK being assassinated by Ted Cruz's father. So just for the sake of accuracy, I think that's a slim read to hang your hat on. As far as the latter half of the statement, I think it's pretty obvious that enormous swaths of the media believe that Trump is the enemy of the people. I mean, they say that he's an actual Putin plant, so I think that's pretty inarguable.
I have a follow-up.
Sure.
Okay. So, you talk about accuracy of statements. Did President Trump actually say that the media was the enemy of the people, or did he say the true enemy of the people was the fake news media?
Again, he said the fake news media were the enemy of the people, but when he says fake news media, he means any media that disagrees with him. And that's why I say that he's actually labeling the media, because the media disagree with him. And again, he is not accurate about how he uses that term. So I'm not willing to grant him the idea that he is only saying the fake news media are the enemy of the people, because I don't think he is applying that label correctly. I think that he's applying that label far too broadly, and in doing so, he's actually undermining his case against the media, because I think you don't have to exaggerate to make the case against the media. I mean, the media really suck at their jobs overall. But I think that when he starts applying labels to stories that are true and saying they're false, when he, legitimately, the first thing he did in office was complain about how the media were miscovering his crowd size, which they were not. They were being accurate about his crowd size. He was not telling the truth about his crowd size. That is not the fake news media being the enemy of the people. He called them the fake news media on that basis.
Sorry about that. Hi there. So as everyone here I'm sure knows, the Supreme Court for the longest time has been an agent for extreme nationwide change. And I think that is a reason that we've seen just the despicable way in which Brett Kavanaugh, who was recently appointed, the way he was treated by a lot of Senate Democrats. And given just the way that we see a lot of this partisan
rancor, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that it's time that we sort of pull back the influence that the Supreme Court has? Because I'm concerned that we're going to have to put justices behind glass like the Pope or something.
Well, I mean, I've always been in favor of curbing the influence of the Supreme Court. I mean, I wrote my third-year paper at Harvard Law School on the idea that judicial review as currently practiced was never intended by the founders and actually skews the system of incentives between the governmental branches. The idea that there was a final word on the Constitution, and it would come from these guys who are appointed for life, and they would be the caddies under the tree determining what the Constitution said. I never thought that that was a good, I'm one of these legal, these legal believers that Marbury versus Madison was wrongly decided. That it's actually an overstep by the courts. Now, with that said, I think that people do overstate the extent to which the court has actually had an impact. There are a few key cases in which the court has had an impact, and most notably Roe v. Wade. But typically, the court tends to rubber stamp already developing public opinion. So I will take, for example, Obergefell, which is a terrible, terrible decision, but was also a trend that was already happening across the country on same-sex marriage, for example. There's a good book called The Hallowed Hope or The Hollow Hope, rather, by Gerald Rosenberg, University of Chicago professor, all about how people sort of misattribute social change to the Supreme Court in a way that is not fully justifiable. With that said, the Supreme Court has way too much power. I think that there are certain changes that could pretty easily be made. For example, I think the court can be limited in its jurisdiction, or at least appellate courts can be limited in their jurisdiction simply with acts of Congress. It doesn't require a constitutional amendment. I think that it would be a good idea to actually set term limits for justices. I think the idea that Ruth Bader Ginsburg can be there until she is legitimately 1,000 years old, that is probably not good for the country and leads to a sort of ghoulish death watch where people are sort of rooting for something bad to happen, but we don't really want to because that would be really bad because she's not a terrible person, so why would you root for that? But if she does go, then maybe we get Amy Coney Barrett, right? And it's really gross. So getting rid of the ghoulish death watch, I think, would probably be a good thing, too.
And we thank everybody for the questions tonight. This is going to be the last question. So sorry if you guys are in line, but we only have time for one more. Make it good.
Okay, this is epic. Okay, so first of all, congratulations on your recent hitting 1 million subscribers on YouTube. Great accomplishment there.
Thank you.
2, talking to yourself about patient zero, I think we confirmed that conservatism is actually a disease. And 3, this is about the identity politics of the question. We often talk about diversity, or as I call it, lack thereof, which is separating people, I believe, by race, gender, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, etc. In itself, diversity is not bad, I think, but being forced diversity is actually very bad because it separates people. But then you see clothes popping up everywhere that seek to separate people based on their backgrounds and everything. My question is, we call for unity in today as an American people, but then we continually divide people based on, once again, on their backgrounds. What do you think we can do as a people to cause more unity in today's society?
Right, I mean, I think that the first thing that we can do to cause more unity is to stop characterizing each other as members of groups and treating each other as members of groups and thinking of ourselves as members of groups. I mean, identity politics is a really, really ugly thing, and that's true for every identity politics group, meaning that, and when I say identity politics, I mean people who are identifying with each other on the basis of immutable characteristics. So I think that there are political groups that make sense. I'm a Republican or I'm a conservative. That's a different group than people who are not conservative. That's an ideology and a philosophy I have more in common with members of my philosophical constituency than I do with people who are not of my philosophical ilk. But what instead we've done is we've separated people into black and white and brown, and we've separated them into male and female, and we've separated them into a bunch of immutable characteristics, and then suggested that we can value their opinion based on how much that particular group has been victimized in American society. This leads to some really dire results. And the way to get beyond that is simply to recognize a simple truth that we all used to recognize. The best way to treat anyone in your life is as an individual, not as a member of a group. Right? We all know this. We all know that in our own lives, even with regard to politics, when we're talking to a person who's right in front of us, we're not seeing them as just a bundle of their characteristics. We are seeing them as an individual human being with their own set of ideas that have been shaped by their experiences. And the only way that we can have a functional republic is to understand that we can only have a conversation that moves beyond those immutable characteristics. Because if we hide behind those immutable characteristics, if I say, you can't understand me, you're not a Jew, right? Then that has stopped the conversation dead. There's no good way to have a conversation from there on in. Treating people as individuals is the key to any decent conversation and to a decent politics in the end. And I think that's what the basis of conservatism is. The basis of conservatism is that at root, we are individuals. And then as individuals, we have social ties that we want to form with each other. We're social creatures, human beings. But we cannot have those social ties in a beneficial and decent way without first recognizing the person we're talking to has the same rights as a human being made in God's image that I do too. When we realize that, that is what marks the transition from being a child to being a grown-up, and from being a person without virtue to being a person with virtue.
All right, let's give one last round of applause for Ben.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.